we have reached the end of Deuteronomy. In this chapter, the book tells about the death of Moses, and it leaves an epilogue on the life and ministry of this giant of the Old Testament. And today we will begin where the book ends and look at the post-history of Moses. How is he mentioned in the New Testament? And I will look at some great sermons throughout the history of the Christian church where Moses was the main figure. Welcome to this last tidbit of the year 2021, the last one in a study of themes from Deuteronomy. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen, and we will jump into chapter 34 in Deuteronomy, and we will read verse 1. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the whole region of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. It was like a vision. His eyes was open for more than most people are able to see when they stand at that spot. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. But I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And here the reference is to the sad moment of the life of Moses. And as we read the sermons in this particular book, we realize that there is a personal element to the sermons. Moses actually complains a little. When he speaks to the people, his sourness to some degree comes out. It is very realistic. Actually, it is often taken as an indication of the truthfulness, the veracity of their sermons. Why would anyone, speaking about the great figure of Moses, leave such elements of weakness if it were not true? And then, of course, the great statement about Moses in the end of the chapter, verse 10, "Since then no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt." No, and Moses did not write this last chapter. On authorship, the important thing is less who wrote it as whether it is truthful or not. As Moses' life ended, his legacy did not. It is not only about the law, it is also about the person who he was. Did you know that in the New Testament there is no other person from the Old Testament mentioned as often as Moses? And you have in the New Testament confirmation of some traditional Jewish knowledge. In Deut 24, we are told that Moses actually was resurrected by Jesus. And in the event on Mount Tabor, told in the Synoptic Gospels, for instance, Matthew 17, Moses and Elias went down to Elisha, I think it is, went down and spoke with and served Jesus Christ. Here referring back to the last verses of the Old Testament in Christian version in Malachi, where Moses represents the law and Elijah the prophets. The law and the prophets, comprising the whole of the Old Testament, came in service of Jesus Christ. When Hebrews in chapter 3 mentions Moses, it mentions Jesus as better. But that should not be misunderstood or misread. We read in chapter 3, verse 1 in Hebrews, "Therefore, holy brothers who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, the apostle and high priest whom we confessed. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. Moses, he says, the author says in verse 5, was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what would be said in the future. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. So the movement in Hebrews does go from what is good to that which is even better. It is not that Moses was half good. He was really good. But Jesus is unique. That's the comparison. The New Testament shares the profound respect for Moses. From that, let me turn to two of the great sermons in the history of the Christian church. Sermons both inspired by the biblical narrative about Moses, inspired by Moses' visits to the mountaintops of Sinai and Nebo. And the first sermon was a sermon preached and written in the 4th century by the great Cappadocian father Gregor of Nazianzus. Now, Gregory was one of the great theologians who confirmed and helped to understand and establish forever the Trinitarian doctrine in the Christian church. In his sermon numbered 28, his sermon on the doctrine of God, he speaks about Moses, and he imagines himself being Moses when he says, I ascend the mountain, that is Sinai, with eagerness. Or to be honest, I am eager with hope, but at the same time I am afraid for my weakness. I ascend in order to enter into the cloud to meet with God as God commands. What happened to me, friends and fellow lovers of the truth? I was running to comprehend God. And so I went up into the mountain. When I looked up, I barely saw the back parts of God, that part which is posterior and comes down to us. And in this I was sheltered by the rock, the word that was made flesh for us. Gregory had come to realize that knowing about and understanding God is not nearly enough. You have to meet him, to be with him. Like said about Moses, who spoke with God face to face. Here he saw God in all his glory, but he saw it, God from behind, sheltered by the rock. That is the word that became flesh for us, the rock being Jesus Christ. Gregor had realized that the Christian life is about knowing and trusting God in a personal relationship and less about understanding everything. From this wonderful sermon, I will move, and I should say that this sermon has had a great impact as Gregor's sermon had throughout history. They have been read and read and read over and over again. But let from this sermon turn to another sermon. Here, the mountain spoken about is no longer Sinai, it's more Mount Nebo and Pisgah. It was preached on April 3, 1968, by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And here are some of his words. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I have been to the mountain top. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I have looked over and have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. These words were spoken April 3, 1968. The next day, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. But he had been on the mountaintop. He had been there with Moses. He had looked into the promised land, and he had been assured, as a people, we will get there. So I hope as you reflect on the biblical narrative about Moses, the giant of the Old Testament, that you will realize that Moses was not only a great lawgiver, he was also a person who spoke face to face with God, who had a personal relationship, who came to know God and could trust his promise. You will reach the land of promise with the people, and so will we. Thank you for listening to the tidbits of this last quarter of 2021 with themes from the book of Deuteronomy. As we move into next year, we will at first study the book of Hebrews, and I will publish tidbits on each chapter of that book as well. And you're welcome to listen in. Thank you.